In the sultry heart of the African summer, the sun pressed down on the stone walls of Leptis Magna, turning marble into mirrors and sand into gold. Tribune Marcus Valerius stood at the edge of the harbor, his armor polished, his eyes locked on the horizon where Phoenician ships bobbed beneath the morning haze. 100 miles inland, beyond the reach of the Mare Nostrum, stretched the void, an endless, sun-scorched expanse Romans called terra incognita, unknown land, untamed, unseen. Marcus was not the sort of officer content with guarding trade routes or overseeing taxation in Africa Proconsularis. His ambition, masked behind discipline and etiquette, burned hotter than the Libyan wind. His father had served under Vespasian, died in Britannia. His mother whispered of lost Carthaginian secrets and southern kingdoms guarded by black stone obelisks. But Marcus didn't believe in myth, only conquest. His mission was sanctioned by Rome but funded by merchants eager for new commodities, gold, ivory, lives. Whatever lay beyond the Saharan curtain was to be claimed or catalogued. The expedition was a strange mixture of power and desperation. 60 soldiers, hardened by desert patrols but untested beyond the frontier. 2 Greek cartographers, whose maps ended in scribbled guesses. A Numidian guide named Jabari, hired for his uncanny knowledge of the terrain and his quiet, unsettling laughter. And at the center stood Marcus, determined to carve his name where Roman sandals had never trod. As the caravan assembled under the shade of the city's southern gate, tensions whispered beneath the leather straps and iron buckles. Soldiers joked with false confidence, gripping Pila and Gladi like totems of certainty. The ox-drawn carts rattled with amphorae of water, medical supplies, and rations designed to last months. No one knew how long the journey would take, only that Rome had demanded a report within a year, or the Senate would assume them dead. Jabari adjusted the folds of his indigo robe and approached Marcus with a warning. "Past the dunes," he said in flawless Latin. "There are no maps, only stories." His voice carried an ancient weariness, like someone who had outlived gods. Marcus didn't flinch. "Then we shall draw new ones." 3 days into the journey, the desert swallowed everything Roman. The sky turned pale and infinite, and the land seemed to breathe with a slow, hostile rhythm. The road vanished, replaced by shifting dunes that erased footprints within hours. Soldiers grew silent, their faces sun-chapped and eyes shaded by linen wrappings. The expedition felt less like a march and more like an intrusion into something primal. Each night, Jabari would light a small fire and stare into it, whispering tales in a tongue none of them knew. One evening, Marcus asked about the black obelisks. Jabari's smile vanished. "They were not made by men. The ground remembers things we do not." But Marcus was a man of Rome. He believed in discipline, not desert ghosts. The next morning, they encountered signs of life. The remnants of a small encampment, half buried in sand, charred wood and shattered pottery scattered like bones. No bodies. Only a single iron spear, not Roman, driven into the ground like a marker. The cartographers grew uneasy. One, a younger Greek named Theon, begged Marcus to turn back. "We've gone beyond the edge of recorded knowledge. There are no roads, no cities, not even tribes." "Exactly," Marcus replied, "which means it's ours for the taking." On the 7th day, they saw it, rising from the dunes like a mirage. A jagged stone structure, black as obsidian, and etched with glyphs that none of them recognized. A tower worn by sand and time, but undeniably crafted. Not Roman, not Carthaginian, older. As they approached, the soldiers instinctively drew their weapons. Jabari halted and would go no further. "This place," he said, eyes fixed on the ruin, "was old when your empire was still a dream. It is not meant to be found." Marcus pressed forward. The air grew still. Even the wind paused, as if nature itself waited. The tower loomed silent, surrounded by broken pillars and steps half buried in time. Inside, it was cooler, deathly silent. The walls covered in carvings of figures with elongated limbs and suns hovering above their heads. Theon traced one of the symbols with his fingers and gasped. "This isn't just a structure," he whispered. "It's a calendar, a record." Before Marcus could reply, a sound echoed through the ruin, a low, resonant hum, like stone awakening. The soldiers bristled. Something ancient stirred within the tower, not alive but not quite dead either. And in that moment, Marcus understood. They had not discovered something lost. They had awakened something waiting. He turned to order a retreat, but Jabari was already gone. The desert, patient and eternal, watched them all. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows from the tower's jagged edge. Somewhere in the distance, a voice echoed, a chant, low and rhythmic, in a language no Roman had ever heard. Marcus clenched his sword, eyes wide, breath shallow. They had gone too far. But there was no turning back. The second night beneath the shadow of the tower brought no rest. The wind had stilled completely, leaving the desert in an eerie, breathless silence. Even the insects had vanished. The soldiers, once rowdy and defiant, now moved with hushed reverence, casting glances over their shoulders as though something might be watching. Marcus sat alone at the edge of the camp, running his hand along the obsidian shard Theon had retrieved from inside the structure. It was cold, unnaturally so, and pulsed faintly like it remembered being alive. Theon had changed since touching the wall. He no longer joked with the others or argued over terrain measurements. Instead, he spent hours scribbling notes in his journal, muttering lines in Greek and a new tongue none recognized. His face had grown hollow, eyes ringed with black like he hadn't slept. Marcus confronted him after breakfast, demanding answers. "These aren't ruins," Theon said, voice brittle. "They're warnings. Whoever built this knew the stars. They mapped their descent, recorded something, and they vanished. This place wasn't abandoned, it was sealed." "By whom?" Marcus pressed. "Not by people," Theon whispered. The words sank into Marcus like thorns. He had no patience for riddles or fear-born madness. But deep inside, even his Roman certainty wavered. His instincts, sharpened by years of campaigning, told him they'd crossed a threshold meant to remain uncrossed. Still, he could not retreat. Not now. Not when he stood at the edge of uncovering something that would eclipse Caesar's conquests. By the afternoon, they had moved further south. The black tower faded behind them, but its presence lingered, etched in every soldier's mind. The terrain shifted. What had once been sand dunes became cracked, dry valleys interrupted by obsidian spikes breaking through the earth like the bones of a buried leviathan. Theon muttered that the land was geometrically wrong, that angles bent in ways Euclid never imagined. Jabari reappeared that evening, emerging from a sandstorm like an apparition. He bore a long scratch across his chest and looked as if he'd aged 20 years. When Marcus questioned him, the guide refused to speak. He simply pointed southwest, toward a jagged ravine obscured by dust. "There is a gate," he finally said, "built not to welcome, but to hold." Despite protests from several soldiers, Marcus pressed forward. 2 men deserted during the night. Their footprints led away into the dark, only to vanish as though the desert had swallowed them mid-step. No one spoke their names. On the 12th day, they reached the gate. It stood half-buried at the base of a canyon, crafted of the same unnatural black stone, adorned with carvings too intricate, too alien. Theon stared at them and wept. These symbols, they speak of thresholds between worlds, of shadows with purpose, of blood. Marcus approached the structure with sword drawn. The gate vibrated faintly, like a plucked string stretched across time. He stepped closer, and for a moment the carvings pulsed with pale light. One soldier vomited. Another dropped to his knees, whispering prayers to gods Marcus didn't believe in. And then the gate opened. It didn't swing or shift. Space simply changed. One moment there was stone. The next, there was a tunnel descending into blackness, carved with impossible symmetry, the walls smooth and seamless, as though created by thought, not tool. Marcus ordered only 10 to descend with him. The others were to guard the entrance and kill anyone who attempted to flee. Inside, the air grew colder with each step. Torches flickered unnaturally, casting shadows that moved independently of their owners. The descent seemed endless. Time lost meaning. Theon murmured something about distances being distorted, that they were moving further than the tunnel could possibly contain. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber. It defied logic. The ceiling rose hundreds of feet above, vanishing into darkness. In the center stood a monolith, crystalline and humming with restrained energy. Around it, the floor was carved with spirals and constellations, many unrecognizable, others resembling Roman and Egyptian charts, only rotated, reversed. The monolith called to Marcus, not with sound, but with memory. Visions flashed, legions burning under unfamiliar skies, winged shadows descending on cities that never existed, and a sun bleeding black across the heavens. He stumbled back, sword clattering to the floor. "Why would anyone build this?" he gasped. Theon, eyes wide, pointed to the monolith. "They didn't build it. They buried it. And we've just let it breathe again." One of the soldiers screamed and fired an arrow into the dark. Nothing responded. But now the air thrummed like a heartbeat. Something ancient and patient had been stirred. The tunnel behind them trembled. Marcus didn't wait. He ordered a retreat, dragging Theon by the arm. As they raced up the tunnel, the walls shimmered, momentarily revealing scenes, cities submerged in sand, creatures with mouths where eyes should be, and beings watching from behind veils of time. They emerged into chaos. The camp outside the gate had vanished. No fire pits, no guards, no carts, only sand, as though they had never existed. Jabari stood alone at the edge of the canyon, arms folded. "You passed through," he said. "You weren't meant to return." Marcus faced him, rage boiling beneath his fear. "What is this place?" Jabari's eyes gleamed with something beyond human comprehension. "A wound in the world, and Rome has torn the scab." Above them, the sky darkened prematurely. No stars, just a swirling void. Marcus turned to his remaining men, barely a dozen now. "We return. We warn the Empire. We seal this place." Jabari shook his head. "You cannot seal what was never meant to open. The sands forget, but the sky remembers." The desert wind howled again for the first time in days, carrying with it a distant sound like chanting or crying. They were not alone, and something was coming. Marcus did not sleep after they emerged from the gate. None of them did. The air had changed, thicker somehow, carrying a scent like wet stone and lightning. The stars, once reliable companions in the desert sky, had shifted. Constellations he had known since youth were missing, replaced by new ones that felt wrong, crooked, aggressive in their unfamiliarity. Theon no longer spoke in Latin or Greek. His voice had adopted the cadence of the monolith's pulse, a rhythm that spoke not to the ears, but the bones. He wrote constantly, pages upon pages of symbols no one could read. When Marcus tried to burn the journal, the flames receded like they feared it. He left it alone after that. The remaining soldiers, 11 now, were changing too. Silently, subtly. One no longer cast a shadow, another's eyes no longer blinked, and they all dreamt of the same thing, a sea of sand, turning to black glass, and in the reflection, their own faces watching from behind alien eyes. They began the return march north with no carts, no guides, and no trust in the path they had once so confidently blazed. Jabari walked with them at first, silent and watchful, until one morning he simply turned and walked into the dunes without explanation or farewell. No one stopped him. Marcus understood now. The guide had never intended to return. Days blurred. The desert resisted them, dunes shifting behind their backs, water spoiling in their skins. Marcus marked their direction with spears, but the markers would vanish within hours. Eventually, they realized they were walking in a spiral, always inward, always closer to a point none could see but all felt. One night, Theon spoke. "It is not a structure," he said to the empty firelight. "It's an anchor. We didn't find a ruin. We found a chain, and we broke it." Marcus said nothing. He stared into the flames, which burned cold and colorless. The sand beyond was pitch black now, and the wind carried whispers, voices calling from childhood, dead comrades, lovers long buried. He gripped his gladius tightly, though he knew it would not help him. The final sign came 3 days later. They stumbled upon their old camp, untouched, arranged just as they had left it before first approaching the tower. Except this time everything was covered in frost, blankets stiff with ice, bread frozen solid. In the heart of the fire pit the coals burned blue, and in the sand nearby the footprints of the deserters they had lost, walking back toward the gate, perfectly preserved. The soldiers began to break then, one by one. Some dropped to their knees and whispered apologies to gods they'd never believed in. One tried to run. He didn't get far. The ground opened beneath him without sound or tremor and closed again like nothing had happened. No one spoke of it. They just kept walking. Marcus kept Theon close now, though he was more specter than man. His skin had turned pale as bone, and his veins pulsed with an inky blackness. But his voice remained steady. "They're not dead, you know," he said one morning as they marched under a sky now perpetually dim. The ones who vanished. They're being shown, taught, translated. Marcus stopped. "Into what?" Theon smiled faintly. "Into understanding." On the 20th day since they had crossed into this cursed part of the desert, they saw smoke on the horizon. Civilization. A village, perhaps. The soldiers wept at the sight. Hope, fragile and desperate, blossomed in their chests. They rushed forward. It wasn't a village. It was Rome. Not the eternal city itself, but one of its outposts. Marcus recognized the standards, the wall construction, even the scent of olive oil in the breeze. But it was wrong. The banners were twisted, bearing sigils he didn't recognize. The guards at the gate wore armor fashioned from obsidian and bone, and their eyes were hollow. This was Rome, but not as they had left it. It had been rewritten. As they stepped through the gate, no one stopped them. No one spoke. Citizens passed without glancing up, their faces emotionless masks, their movements perfect. Too perfect. Marcus called out in Latin, demanded answers. No one responded. A child dropped a doll in the dirt. It turned to stare at them. The doll blinked. The legionaries were led to a temple, not by force but as if drawn by instinct. Inside, the monolith waited. Not a replica. The same. Theon dropped to his knees and began to recite verses Marcus didn't understand. The remaining soldiers followed, surrendering one by one, their minds folding like paper. Only Marcus remained standing, sword drawn, though it felt as heavy as the desert itself. He approached the monolith. "This wasn't a conquest," he whispered. "It was a test." The monolith pulsed once, and he understood. They had been chosen not for their courage or strength, but for their curiosity. Rome had always sought to dominate the world. Now the world had reached back. It had shaped itself around Rome, mirrored it, improved upon it, not in mercy but in precision. This new empire had no room for weakness, no tolerance for rebellion. It simply was, and it would spread. Marcus dropped his sword and stepped forward. The stone welcomed him. From the gates of the outpost, a new column of soldiers departed. Clad in black, eyes aglow, silent and synchronized, they marched north toward the heart of the empire. The desert behind them sighed, and the sky above closed like a lid.